What's up, everybody? Welcome into an episode of what's supposed to be an SEC roundtable with a whole group of us. Unfortunately, tonight we were not able to get it all together. I am joined by Daniel of the Gator Podcast, though, and tonight we're going to be looking at the spring practices, our kind of our thoughts of teams coming out of spring practice. Of course, we're going to focus on Tennessee and Florida because that's who we cover, but we're going to give our thoughts on some of the other SEC teams as well, see kind of what we think is going to be an avenue for success for teams this year, and just our thoughts in general on them. But Daniel, appreciate you joining me tonight. How we doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. Funny enough, one of our friends just sent me a message saying he wouldn't be able to make it tonight as soon as we started recording. But
Yeah,
anyways,
exactly.
no, I'm doing well. Good to talk to you again. I know we've had several, whether it's an SEC roundtable or talking about Gators Vols. We've had several interactions. Always a good time to be with you, Michael.
Yeah, glad that we were able to do this tonight. But let's hop right into this, and we're going to start off with somebody you're very familiar with. Let's start off talking about Florida, man. What are some of your thoughts coming out of spring for Florida this year?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag overall. I'm pretty positive coming out of spring. Granted, with Florida winning the basketball national title, it helps get a lot more orange and blue glasses on.
You had to
Just
bring
being
that
honest,
one up, didn't
I
you? So
I did. I actually got this is the first time I've been on a podcast not wearing either a generic Florida shirt or a football shirt. I've actually got a basketball shirt on tonight, which was that random, and then I'm like, oh, I'm on tonight. This is perfect. But
yeah,
anyways,
just showing it off because you're on with me. There we go. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But anyway, it's not an SEC title shirt. But anyways,
Fair.
no, that really does help give us some orange and blue glasses on things. Where had it gone like last year and we lost in the first round, and then had some of the things that we saw at the spring game happen, you know, gets you feeling one way, but you kind of shrug off some of the not so great stuff. Like, for example, spring game. Obviously, a lot of the spring game's not televised this year as everyone's trying to get more secretive due to alleged tampering. Even though I'm like, hey, Dallas Wilson, our true freshman receiver, came in for the spring and then had a really excellent spring game, over 200 yards receiving. As someone said, people are going to know that a 5-star receiver is a 5-star receiver, whether they watch the spring game or not. And if they read the stat line of 200 yards, over 200 yards receiving, they're going to see it regardless of whether they see it or not, and they'll want to tamper. But either way, definitely that was a highlight, seeing our young receivers play, watching Harrison Bailey lead lead one offense up and down the field on our one of our defenses. You're very familiar with Harrison Bailey, Tennessee Vol hero, I know. Um,
Yeah.
I got to watch him play in Neyland once. Anyways, we won't talk about that game.
Yeah.
Uh,
Fair enough.
uh, but anyways, you saw that, but also we did see growth from one of our quarterbacks who started last year on the road at Texas, who did not have a great showing in that game. Of course, as a walk on, now a former walk on, you do kind of expect it. Of course, a lot of Gator fans are like, we kind of need a better backup, and that's kind of where Bailey came in. But seeing that growth behind DJ Lagway, since unfortunately we've had a history of quarterback injuries in the Billy Napier era, and that's not to blame him for them at all, but it's just something that somehow has happened. Anthony Richardson was not 100% most of his year. Graham Mertz ended up missing the last game and a half. Well, at least the last game and a quarter of the second season. Last year, Graham Mertz, of course, goes out for the season uh, after leading a touchdown drive in Neyland Stadium, and then DJ Lagway battles injuries for the rest of the season. So it's
Yeah.
always for Florida. It's kind of now superstition to have a good backup quarterback, but seeing the quarterbacks really move the ball on the defense was good to see. Of course, on the other side is our defense, which granted, they were missing a few starters, but seeing how easy the offense kind of moved and knowing how we feel about how our offense can be predictable and repetitive, and just things like runs up the middle, breaking for a 90-yard touchdown where no one made a tackle. Those are things that in orange and blue glasses, due to things like championship, it's like, yeah, but it's also like, I expect my second, third defensive tackle to be able to stuff the middle a little bit more. Sure, the first string may not be playing, but defensive tackle being a heavily rotated position, you kind of want more. But with that said, coming into the season and hopefully after summer, and practice starts, I'll be able to give a better prediction or better feelings. But it's good to see that the offensive line returned everybody. First time that's happened in the Billy Napier era. We've got 4 seniors, including several multi-year starters. In fact, I think all 5 starters from last year are back. So it's pretty. With that, DJ Lagway coming back and actually being healthy, he didn't throw in the spring, so it was kind of a question mark. Billy Napier said in an interview with Josh Pate this week that DJ's throwing 3 times a week. So we'll see how we'll see how well that works out for us. It really stinks that I wasn't able to throw and get all the chemistry and timing that you get, especially the new receivers coming in, like Dallas Wilson that I talked about, or like J. Michael Sturdivant, who came over, transferred in from UCLA. But there is still time for him to get that with him. But with that said, this is probably the best talent-wise team Billy Napier has had. So this year's really the put up or shut up year. You've asked Gator fans to stomach 2 losing seasons. Last year got the vote of confidence when it was looking like a third straight losing season. You end up 7-5, getting 2 awesome upsets at home over LSU and Ole Miss. Now it's you got to take the next step with a 4 senior O line, all of those seniors multi-year starters. You've got this talent at wide receiver. You returned Caleb Banks, who had I almost confused him with another player on the defensive line, but Caleb Banks, who had a shot to be a decent round draft pick if he left defensive tackle. One of the biggest, I would say, recruiting efforts of the offseason was keeping Caleb Banks in Gainesville for 1 more year. Also, Tyreek Sapp, who over the last 4 games of the season led the nation in sacks. And I think the Gators in the last 3 or 4 weeks were the number 1 team in sacks in the nation, and they didn't start off doing too well. So if they can carry that over, the defense can carry over what we saw against LSU, what we saw slowing down Ole Miss. It could be a very exciting season in Gainesville. I'm not ready to celebrate and say we're going on a major playoff run or anything yet, but coming out of a spring game where things looked pretty decent, and since Caleb Banks and didn't play much in that spring game, I'm coming out pretty positive. And you know how much I can really look at this team and find reasons to say, I don't know if I believe. I mean, we talked about that last year before, but this is a season where I'm like, all right, if it's going to happen, it's got to happen now. And I think it very well could.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to what my next question for you was going to be. What are the vibes around Billy Napier? Because, coming into last year, it was this dude's on the hot seat. He's got to do something this year. And then Florida ends up extending him for another year. Ended up deserving that extension after the end of the season last year. But what are the vibes around him right now? And you also alluded to it. This is a put up or shut up year, isn't it?
Yes. The vibes, I mean, it's really not changed much in Gainesville because there are the vibes of the people that he can't do anything wrong. It'll take any coach in the history of coaching 10 plus years to get more than a losing season, with what he inherited. But I don't think he inherited anything worse than what Jeremy Pruitt left for Josh Heupel. Just being honest.
Yeah.
And but with that said, there were rumors that part of his condition to stay is that he hired a real OC. he decided, nah, I'm not going to do that. Now, I don't know if those rumors are true or not, but those were heavily, heavily pushed by a lot of people who do have connections. And then he decided not to. Although for the second year in a row, it was announced that tight ends coach Russ Callaway has been promoted. And last year, on my personal profile, people can probably find the text where I said my hope for the offense this year is Russ Callaway showing his influence in the offense. We didn't see that last year. And of course, Miami, first game of the season, comes in, drills us by 24 points at home. Texas A&M comes in, is up 20-0 at the half. I mean, heck, how many times did we fail to score in the red zone in Neyland Stadium? Even in our wins, there were things where we got the ball with short fields. Like, for example, we had a big fumble recovery return against LSU. And of course, the defense did a great job holding LSU to a lower point total than what they had for the season. And that win, Ole Miss, they fumble a punt, or, they muff a punt. We don't really get a first down after that, but we get a field goal out of it. So hopefully with DJ Lagway being fully healthy, and hopefully that announcement for the second year in a row means Russ Callaway will actually have his fingerprints. And what I mean by that is Russ Callaway actually coached the number one passing offense in FCS at Samford a few years ago, and coached the Walter Payton Award. For those not in the know, that is the FCS version of the Heisman. Coached that quarterback and had a great system where in 2018 he goes into Doak Campbell Stadium at FSU and gives FSU a 3.5 quarter game at Samford of all teams. And so he's a guy who has called good offenses, granted at a lower position, but this is a guy who can help bring the ceiling higher, because the general vibe is a guy whose career passing ranking finish is in the high 50s. Maybe that needs to be better in the SEC, where you don't necessarily have to have a top tier run and pass offense, but if you have a not great, you're finished 60th in the nation in passing or worse, you're really not going to have many successful games in the SEC, because guys have the guys to stack the box. So that's really the hope with Napier, is he's bet on himself as far as his offense, but again, second year in a row has had that. You're hoping it's the defense. And so there are other people, like I said, that no coach in the history of coaching could have done better than Napier's done so far. And then there are other people like, it's a put up or shut up year. Show us that in wins on the field. You've got all this talent, you're returning, and I keep harping on the O-line, because after this year, it could be a whole different O-line. Also, defense, you return Tyreek Sapp, who did have such a monster second half of the year. Caleb Banks, who did have a monster year. You've got linebackers who are highly recruited, got lots of experience last year, who are sophomores. You've got a senior corner. You've got a junior in his third year of starting back at safety, along with another guy who's got 2-3 years of experience. Like, all over the field, you've got all this. There's, as a lot of people said, there's no excuses. Last year, you talked about he earned it, earned the extension by going 2-5 against winning teams. And so this year, it's like no losing record against losing teams. You're 0 for whatever in 3 years, haven't beat a winning team on the road. This year, you've got Miami, LSU, possibly Kentucky will be a winning team. Ole Miss should at least be a winning team, and A&M on the road. You've got to have a winning record there, because if not, you're looking at 2-3 with some tough home games against Tennessee, possibly a FSU if they get their, stuff together. And you've got Texas at home. So, and if you go 2-3 and you drop one of those home games, you're looking at 8-4. And I don't know if Florida fans are going to stomach, 2 straight losing seasons, a 7-5 season and an 8-4 season, when the goal is to compete for championships. So that's what it is in Florida. Again, I think it gets it done. Last year when I was on, the preseason podcast, people asked, what does Billy Napier on the hot seat have to do to earn another year? I said 7 wins. I did say I think he gets there. I will say, halfway through the season. Did not look like he was going to get there. And then the team pulls off 2 major upsets at home and faces an FSU team that fell off the cliff. If they weren't a rival, I would feel bad for them. But with that said,
I understand that. Yeah.
and I know our Jesse from our affiliate FSU podcast is, if he hears that, he's going to be texting me up. He's going to be like, "Really, buddy? You had to say that?" Yes, I did. But we'll see. But it's been a interesting time in Gainesville. It is great to see the talent level clearly go up. Now it's just about seeing the production as far as results go up with that talent level. And if not, you and I talked about all the reasons why, and I'll probably have a podcast on it to really deep dive. But it's one of these things with all the people that you're losing after this year. You're already going to have a transition year for talent. Might as well do a transition. But I've said, and I'll say it again, I think the magic number is 9 wins this year. Some people believe that may get you a playoff berth. We didn't see that last year for any 9-win teams, but you never know. We'll see how it works out. Of course, again, have plenty of tough games on that schedule. Death Valley, Texas at home. Heck, by the end of the season, for all we know, whatever quarterback you have is going to be on a Heisman Trophy run in that Heupel offense, kind of like Hooker was. And then we'll see how that goes on, probably under the lights, second to last week of the season. And then, of course, we have FSU the next week. Hopefully, we're not looking at rivalries back to back, but you get to experience the vicious Florida fall weather, something that you guys are not ready for, I'm sure.
Yeah, so just looking at the schedule, I mean, it starts off against Long Island, and then you get South Florida in game 2, and I won't say that South Florida is going to be a guaranteed win because they've put up a fight against some SEC opponents recently, namely Alabama. Say what you will about that game 2 years ago with Nick Saban, but South Florida really gave them a fight in that game. But I do think Florida starts off 2-0 there. Then you got the trip to LSU. And for me, looking at that one, I think y'all are catching LSU at a great time at the beginning of the season. Lots of questions around Garrett Nussmeier. You got polls saying that he's the best quarterback in the SEC this year. But then you've also got Brian Kelly going on record saying, this guy can be pinpoint accurate one throw, and then the next throw is throwing it 7 rows deep. So what Nussmeier are you going to get this year? And how's his offensive line going to look? What are his playmakers around him going to look like? So I think y'all are catching LSU at a great time. I'm not going to say win or loss on that one, but I think it's going to be a great game. You obviously got Miami the following week, and you got transfer Carson Beck there in Miami, but what else do they have around them? I'm not sure. And I'll go ahead and tell you, I trust Billy Napier in Florida over Mario Cristobal in Miami. So I'm going to go ahead right now and say that y'all win that game. Start off the season at least 3-1, maybe even 4-0 before the home game against Texas after coming off of a bye week, by the way. Texas, that's going to be a tough one. I mean, you got Arch, but also where is Texas going to be at this point? You've got playmakers around Arch that I think will make Texas a very good team, a national title contending team. But how's Arch going to look in his first full season as the starter? It's going to be interesting to watch. Could be a win, could be a loss in that one. Then you mentioned Texas A&M. I happen to like Mike Elko there at A&M, and he's got a lot of returning players. I love Marcel Reed at quarterback. Last year he was young, still made a lot of mistakes, but he also looked like a very good quarterback at times. That trip on the road to College Station is going to be rough.
Yeah, fun fact about that game. There are actually people on Twitter that'll tell you being down 20-0 to Texas A&M at home was due to Marcel Reed. He plays defense as well. Fun fact.
Sometimes quarterbacks do that. So.
Yeah, hey, I was impressed when I saw large contingents telling me that fact. I didn't know.
So Mississippi State the following week. I do think that Jeff Lebby is going to turn some things around at Mississippi State eventually, but this year is not that year. You guys will get a win against Mississippi State. Then you got the the game against Georgia in Jacksonville. I personally think that Georgia is going to take a slight step back this year, but when I say slight, I'm talking 9-3 instead of 10-2.
Yeah.
Now, where those losses fall, we'll see. Kentucky, look, Florida is trending one direction right now. Kentucky is trending another direction. I don't think this game is going to be close this year for you guys against Kentucky.
Yeah.
Um,
I would hope not, and I would step in and say I really think this should be a win. There was a time where we won over 30 straight against Kentucky, but our last few trips from 2015 through 2023, we've won one of those.
yeah,
Well, we've won more than one of those five, but they have all been close. So I almost misstated there. 2015, 14-9 game. 2017, you go back and watch Kentucky. My brother's wedding day, actually. Kentucky leaves a player wide open, like doesn't even put a guy out on the wide receiver. So we snap the ball and just throw up the easiest lob
yeah,
they'll
I
ever see
remember
to a
that
wide
game.
open guy. 2019, game's not going our way, but then Felipe Franks gets injured and a guy named Kyle Trask comes in and changes the game. And then, of course, 2021, we lose Dan Mullen smiling after losing, coming for the mid game handshake, which really endured him and helped him stay on for a few more games after that. And then, of course, 2023, my only trip to Lexington in my life. And, well, Ray Davis had a day. We'll just say
Yeah,
that.
he
So
sure did.
so with
Uh,
that said, and then also there have been other times throughout the years where good Gator teams have had problems with Lexington. So it's a game where I think we should win, like you said, by a lot. But just as the Gator superstition that I have, it's like I don't want to throw it up just because we've now got, a track record of, iffy games in Lexington. So I think it's a chance where we can definitely win, but I wouldn't be surprised if somehow, some way coming out of that Georgia game, and especially if it ends up being a noon kickoff, maybe being closer than it should be.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned the Gator superstition there because I've got a take coming up here in about 2 games about superstition. So you do have Ole Miss following that Kentucky game. That's at Ole Miss. I've got a feeling Lane Kiffin and the boys they're going to be looking for revenge after last year's game in the swamp. But we'll see where Ole Miss is at that point. That's going to be a really good game either direction. Tennessee on November the 22nd. In my lifetime, I do not remember a game this late in the season against Florida. To my knowledge, the only time that the game has been this late was in '01 because the game was postponed and rescheduled due to 9/11. All games were they were
Yep.
postponed for that weekend, moved to the end of the season. That was a game where I believe did Tennessee not come to the swamp that year and beat Florida?
They did,
Yeah,
and cost us what looked like a
it
shot to
looks like
go to the national
a
title.
shot to the national title. Yeah. Um, so you mentioned the Gator superstition against Kentucky. I've got the Tennessee superstition against Florida because it has been since I believe '03, '04, somewhere along those lines, since Tennessee has gone down to Gainesville and gotten a win.
Yeah,
We've kind of got the monkey off of our back if we can't beat Florida because we've won 2 out of the last 3 years, but they have both been at home. And in recent years, Florida has gotten better as the season goes on. They seem to get on a hot streak down the stretch. And that's what I'm afraid is going to happen in this game. I do think that Tennessee slightly, and when I say slightly, I mean it is the smallest margin, is better than Florida overall. But it's the swamp effect that it's something about it with Tennessee. I've got a feeling that Tennessee goes down to Florida and takes another one on the chin this year. And I've got Tennessee fans when they see this video, they're not going to like that.
yeah,
But it's what we at Tennessee call the better ball syndrome.
yeah.
And I've got a feeling it's going to happen again this year.
And you know what? You talk about the swamp effect. I will. all but guarantee you our wins over LSU and Ole Miss last year, if they weren't at home, those are both losses, and probably by multiple scores, because the LSU game was overly electric. Heck, next to me at the game, I had my neighbor who happened to get tickets through the military because it was our saluting those who serve game. And we had extra seats with us. So I'm like, instead of going and sitting high wherever your seats are, we've only got my wife and I. So come sit with us. And big Alabama fan and his wife, who's a Illinois fan, they're sitting there. And when we walked out of that stadium, they're like, "That's the craziest stadium experience we've ever had." And here they we're neutral observers, but yeah, no, it can definitely play a part. I would say we played you guys in December 2020 in
That's right, the
Neyland.
COVID year. I forgot about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I wish I had my photo from that just to pop up on screen where I've got my mask on and I've got a beanie on, and all you can see is like this much of my eye. I was actually just looking at recently because someone referenced the game, and Florida were blue helmets for like with orange Gator script. Only time we've ever worn those. Yeah, it was a interesting game, and this fun trip to Dollywood for my wife and I that week. So that's how I remember that one. As people were like, "Man, this guy's really ranting about this game." Yeah, because it wasn't just a game; it was a vacation experience for me in
Yeah,
Eastern Tennessee. But yeah,
I'd
no,
forgotten about COVID year. So
yeah, we all have our different teams, uh, and just knock on wood, it's like our trips to Vanderbilt most of the time will win, but there have been too many times, including national championship years. We've gone into Vandy and games have been way too close. And then, of course, that last game, I'm sure you're going to get to it. Florida State at home. Who knows what we're going to see out of the Seminoles? Uh, this was a team 2 years ago. They're suing, they're almost in playoffs and their lawsuits because they didn't get in and all this stuff at 13-0. Of course, they lost Jordan Travis. And then last year, 2-10. And at one point mid-season, I put out and I talked to some of our other podcasters with the College Huddle, Knight Bingle from UCF, and of course Jesse from Plant the Spear. And I said, all right, at this point, who finishes with the most wins? Florida, Florida State, or UCF? And a lot of the fan bases were split, but none of them were picking their own team.
yeah,
And
exactly.
Florida came out the victor there through the two upsets to avoid being tied with UCF. But it was definitely a fun thing. I think FSU, there's no way they go 2-10 again, as much as the sickness in my head of wanting to see them do it again would happen. Um, but I think it's a game. I just don't see them jumping enough for how much we have returning. Like it would take a Herculean coaching effort to go from 2-10 to winning in the swamp at the end of next year, barring Florida having a ton of injuries and we're walking out walk-ons and a bunch of third string players. But strange things have happened. I've actually seen Florida with 30 something injuries towards the end of the season. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Of course, then there's also the factor of by that point, we've played 5 games in a row of Georgia at Kentucky, at Ole Miss, and then, of course, rivalry game with Tennessee. Where are we at physically going into that game? But I think
Yeah,
it's going to be an interesting season. Definitely some fun home games. Like you said, USF actually, you talked about they've played some SEC teams close. One of those teams was UF in 22, Billy Napier's first year. Uh, Arguably a bad snap kept the Gators from getting upset. They had a field goal with a chance to tie it. I believe it's the tie. It might be for the win. And then a very low snap causes the hold to be fumbled a little bit, and the kick was no good. But if it's good snap, who knows? So we will see. But then of course you have Texas at home, Mississippi State, like you said, Jeff Lebby. I do expect him to have the Bulldogs getting better. I don't think they'll fully turn the corner this year. I do feel that for them, because they lost their quarterback, our friend Landon from the My Dogs Are Barking podcast, feel for him because I do think that Jeff Levy is a good coach, but he walked into a no-win
Yeah,
situation, which I told him before the season. I'm like,
absolutely.
you have a team that decide, you had the unfortunate Mike Leach situation, but then the unfortunate decision to go from an air raid offense in this system to a entirely pro system to saying, oh no, after 1 year, let's not do that. Let's go back to a spread system with Jeff Levy. And of course that changes, all sorts of personnel and problems. So it'll take them a little while. If I will say this, if it's at a point where Florida, talked about starting 3-1, possibly losing to both Texas teams, um, if we end up losing that Mississippi State game and we're 3-3, oh, it's not going to be fun times in Gainesville if we end up 3-4. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I figure why not? We're talking all scenarios. I do see a scenario where, like you said, there's a chance we go 4-0. We've seen the swamp come alive and have upsets plenty of times through the years. And who knows? Arch Manning, we've not really seen him too much in big games. Even in high school, he's playing in like a lower division. So he may be a guy that comes out and he's, a Nico,
And pretty much,
come,
yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yeah, so
so, so we'll see.
I'm not gonna make any predictions right now. I'll do that later this summer when Skylar and I do our predictions for each SEC team. But I'm just looking down the schedule here, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can see on the very low end, and this is the very, very low end of this schedule, Florida going 4-8. I've got guaranteed wins as of right now against Long Island, South Florida, Mississippi State, and Kentucky. Um, and like I said, I don't think that's going to happen. That's on a very low end.
Right.
Billy Napier has not reached rock bottom by no means. If anything, he's trending up. But then on the high end, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at 4. I'll go ahead and put 5 there. Let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll say 10-2 on the high end. I'm gonna say right now the guaranteed losses on this schedule for Florida is the 2 best teams in the SEC. Is Texas, is Georgia as of right now. But I can absolutely see Florida going in and getting a win against any other team on this schedule. And I won't completely count out Texas or Georgia because we've already talked about Arch Manning. We don't know what he's going to be like. Is Texas going to be where everyone expects him to be? Is Georgia going to take a bigger step back than what a lot of people think they could be? No, that's another rivalry game there that anything can happen. So, right now I'm going to say 10-2 on the highest end. It could be better than that. But I mean, that's a wide range there. My personal thoughts on this as an outsider looking into Florida scares me this year. And I think that they are a dark horse team to make the playoffs this season because of, you already mentioned, the returning starters you have on the offensive line. This has got to be the most experienced offensive line returning in the SEC next season. You've also got a very talented quarterback in DJ Lagway that I think that I hate it for Graham Mertz. What happened to him last season, going down in that Tennessee game, ending his career the way that he did. But the best thing, in my opinion, to happen to DJ Lagway was that injury happening and him being the guy to go ahead and step in his freshman season and get the experience that he did, so that now in his sophomore season, when he's the guy, I feel like DJ Lagway is going to have a breakout season this year, especially behind that experienced offensive line. You've got playmakers around him as well. My question, which we kind of talked about before we started recording here, is that defense going to be able to step up the way that they needed to get stops so you don't have to put up 35 plus points a game to win a ball game? But Florida, I think, is a dark horse to make the college football playoff to really upset some teams this season. And I've already been on record earlier in this show. I think that Tennessee, especially based on what happened in Tennessee's offseason, when they go to Florida in late November, I think that Florida gets Tennessee in that game.
Yeah, and I agree with your entire assessment. That's why it's a put up or shut up here. You can see there's so many advantages going Florida's way as far as personnel and everything. Haven't even talked about Trey Wilson, who was injured last year for most of the season, who freshman year I believe he was a true freshman All American at receiver, very dynamic, didn't play as much last year, unfortunately, due to injury, but you bring him back in the mix. So it'll be a very good year. Of course, Jaden Ball last year, true freshman, ran for a ton of yards, got better as the season went on. So it'll be interesting. But we've talked so much about the Gators, and I know we've talked a little bit about it, but go ahead, tell me about the Volunteers and how it feels for you guys coming out of spring, since you did have perhaps the story of the offseason in the SEC, and of course, that's the dismissal of Nico.
Yeah, so Tennessee, up and down off season. You mentioned what happened with Nico coming in. Personally, and I told you this off the air here, I think Tennessee is better for it. I had you reach out to me right after it happened, and several other of our friends in the SEC, especially, and even outside of the SEC, reach out and said, just want to commend you guys for what y'all decided to do with Nico, setting the precedent that, hey, it's not about me, it's about the team as a whole, which is exactly why Tennessee made the move that he did. And Heupel said it. There is no person that wears the power tee, including myself, that is bigger than that power tee. So they really had no choice but to go ahead and let Nico walk. Of course, there was all sorts of speculations that he was possibly going to do it before the college football playoff game because he didn't get more money. I have come to find out that Tennessee didn't end up paying him more money. I think that um, his representatives asked him about it, or asked about it, not him himself. But that's a whole other story. But um, I do think that Tennessee overall, even though you don't have your guaranteed starting quarterback going into next season, I think that they are better overall for that as a team. Um, we started off a little bit concerned after that. We only had two scholarship quarterbacks on the roster: redshirt freshman Jake Merklinger and true freshman George McIntyre. Now they did go out, and it was basically the first ever college football trade with Joey Aguilar originally from App State, transferred to UCLA, coming to Tennessee, Nico going to UCLA. And Tennessee won the trade, by the way, because we also picked up a transfer from UCLA's women basketball team that was formerly a top 50 recruit. So Tennessee won that trade overall, getting two players from UCLA. But it's still a lot of hype around this team because of what's returning on the defensive side of the ball. And then offensive side of the ball, it's a lot of young talent ready to make their name. We did lose Brew McCoy, who just recently medically retired from the game of football. Dante Thornton, draft pick. Did lose Squirrel White to the transfer portal. There were some other wide receivers transferred out. You lost, obviously, the biggest offensive piece in Dylan Sampson. But a lot of young talent coming in this year that I think is going to step up and make a name for themselves. So I'm really excited for this year. Now, my expectations coming in, I'm going to say 9-3 right now. And that's right now. It could change before I make my official prediction for Tennessee. But, this season, we've got two of our biggest rivals on the road. I've already mentioned Florida at the end of the year. We go to Gainesville. You also go to Tuscaloosa this year.
Yep.
You get Georgia at home. That when we had Nico, I said, I think this is the year we get Georgia. Carson Beck's already transferred out. We got Nico. We get them in the third game of the season. We can catch Georgia before they figure things out. Well, then we find out that Nico's leaving. I still think Tennessee can get a win against Georgia, but you're asking a lot out of a guy that is playing his first SEC game, um, whether it be Joey Aguilar, whether it be Merklinger, whether it be McIntyre. Their first SEC game is going to be against a team that has made a college football playoffs. What is it? The last 5 seasons. They've won 2 national championships in that time, something like that. They're asking a whole lot for that right there. No, it's 4 out of the last 5 seasons that they made it, because Alabama made it in 24 or 23. So yeah, I'm optimistic about this year, but still 9-3. I think they just miss out on the playoffs this season as of right now. But the schedule is also favorable for Tennessee this season.
Yeah, let's go ahead and go through that schedule. So you start off with Syracuse. Now that's an interesting noon kickoff game. 10-win team from last year, Syracuse. How do you think you match up? I'll be honest, outside of knowing that they beat Miami at the end of the season last season to kind of knock Miami out of the playoff hunt, I don't know as much about them. But I'm sure you've maybe looked a little bit more, even though it's still early. How do you think that one matches up?
I think Tennessee matches up well against Syracuse. I do know that they're bringing in a new quarterback as well, as Kyle McCord is gone now. He was a quarterback last year for Syracuse. I'm not sure who it is that they brought in this year to play quarterback, but I think Tennessee goes into Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Syracuse in that game and gets a win. I think the line last I looked was sitting at like 11.5, something like that. I think Tennessee wins comfortably in this game, no matter who the quarterback is. I'm not gonna rule out seeing multiple quarterbacks in this game. I do think going into this season, because of his experience, Joey Aguilar is gonna win the job. But by no means, when he came in here, was he told, "Hey, you're getting this starting quarterback job." And I meant to say this earlier. I'm glad that Josh Heupel, when he brought him in, said, "Look, you're gonna have a chance to win this starting job, but you're not guaranteed this job. I've got 2 really good guys right here in the wings that they can absolutely lead this team, but you've got experience, and I want to give you a shot." But it's a 3-way quarterback battle going into the fall. I would not be shocked if we saw Joey Aguilar start this game, play a half, depending on what Tennessee looks like in that half, depending on what the score is like. You might see Merklinger get the 3rd, McIntyre get the 4th, or vice versa. Something along those lines. You will probably see multiple quarterbacks in this game to see what they look like. But I do think Tennessee gets a win in this contest.
Okay, and the next game, East Tennessee State, probably a win there. If not, you've got much bigger problems.
Yes.
And then you got Georgia at home. How are you feeling about this early season matchup against Georgia? It's kind of weird because usually you have Georgia late, Florida early, and then somehow that seems to have flipped this year.
Yeah, so I don't feel as good about the game now as I did at the end of the season this past year, because like I said, Carson Beck is gone now, and when we had Nico, I said, okay, Georgia's still going to be figuring things out with whoever it is. Probably going to be Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, who I think is capable of being good, but he's not proven yet. So
Right.
I felt really good about that game. Then the whole Nico stuff happened. Don't feel as good about it now, but it's going to be which team can figure things out the fastest. And I've
Yeah.
still got confidence in Tennessee in this game, but I'm going to chalk this right now as a loss to Georgia, because Georgia is a better team overall, even though Tennessee is inching closer. Each year, they're inching closer to Georgia. But
Yeah.
Kirby Smart is a fantastic coach. That is one of the final hurdles that Josh Heupel still has to hit. So there's 4 hurdles that Tennessee really needs to hit, one of them this year to have success. The first one that we're coming to is beating Georgia. He has yet to do that. The second one, you have to go on the road and beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. The third one is going on the road and beating Florida in Gainesville. And the last one, you've got to not drop a game that you should win. Each season, Josh Heupel and Tennessee have lost a game that they should have won. This past season was Arkansas. You go on the road to Arkansas in one of the ugliest games that I have seen, and you lose that game. You're probably 11-1. Matter of fact, you are 11-1 last year if you do win that game. Might be in an SEC title game at that point. Probably not because, actually, you would be because your only loss would be to Georgia, and Georgia dropped 2 conference games. So you've got to not lose a game that you should win. You've got to at least hit one of those hurdles. I'm going to say you need to hit 2 of those hurdles this season. I do think that the best chance for Heupel to do that is this game because of the road games against Alabama and Florida this season.
And I will also throw this out. Just I pulled up Georgia's schedule real quick. They face Marshall and Austin Peay before going to Neyland Stadium, and with them, it does allow them to get more experience and work through things. Of course, playing lower opponents early does that, but with Syracuse, even if they take a step back from last year, I would still say a higher quality opponent. So Tennessee might have the opportunity to get some, experience with adversity or higher level that may, in an early season game, give them that little bit of an edge. But we will see. Strange things have happened the last few years in Neyland, and of course, that game may not be an exception. Then you've got UAB, again, games that should be chalked up as a win. Then you go to Starkville. And I would say, and this is a weird one for me to say because I don't think they're there yet, but you talked about last year, Arkansas on the road and dropping a game you shouldn't. Who knows? I think that could be a dark horse.
In my opinion, if there is a game on this schedule that Tennessee was going to drop and they shouldn't, it would be this game. And I'll get to the reason why when we get to the team that I'm talking about that Tennessee will win on the road. But this, in my opinion, would be that letdown spot if there was one on the road this year.
Yes, and then you got a bye week, and then the revenge game against Arkansas. So what do you think about going and having that week off and then getting Arkansas in somewhat of a way a tune-up for that trip to Tuscaloosa you mentioned?
Tennessee wins by 3 touchdowns, at least. No, I'm just kidding. I think this is going to be a good game. Arguably, a game that could define both Tennessee and Arkansas's season. Sam Pittman took another step forward last year after taking a huge step back, but I also attribute a lot of that to Bobby Petrino. I think it was a fantastic move by Arkansas and Pittman to go and get Bobby Petrino to run the offense. And I think the Arkansas has got a shot to still take another step forward this year. But we'll see where both of these teams are at by this point in the season. And, you alluded to that game in Tuscaloosa the following week.
Yeah.
I will say of the 3 games this season, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, this game right here, I feel the second best about. I already said I feel best about Georgia because of the spot that Tennessee gets them and the fact that they get them at home. This Alabama game here, I feel better about than I do about the Florida game. And it's not just because I'm sitting here talking to you trying to, make you feel better about Florida. I genuinely, Florida, there is no quarterback controversy right now.
Right.
I feel like Florida as a whole, even though Alabama might have more talented players, I feel like Florida as a whole has got things figured out a little bit more than Alabama does. You want to talk about a make it or break it year for Billy Napier? What about Kalen DeBoer at Alabama?
Yep.
I know it's only his second season, but after the success that Alabama has had under Nick Saban in recent years, how are they going to take it if Kalen DeBoer goes 9-3 again this year and misses out on the playoffs again? How are they going to take it if Kalen DeBoer takes a step back and goes 8-4 or worse? Now, do I think that's going to happen? Not the 8-4 part. I could absolutely see a 9-3, and that's without pulling up their schedule right now. But Also, you still don't know exactly who your quarterback's going to be. You've got Ty Simpson, who the job is basically landing in his lap this season, but he hasn't just stepped up and taken that job from what I've heard out of Tuscaloosa. You've got I believe it's the freshman quarterback coming in this year that's done some great things. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but I mean, you've got a quarterback battle going on down there too. What's Alabama going to look like at this point in the season? So, because of it being on the road, I still don't feel great about it, but I feel better about this game than I do about traveling to Gainesville and playing against Florida.
Yeah, and not as a Gator fan, but I do say as a Gator fan as well, but I do understand that because, like you said, no QB controversy. Where will Alabama's head be? I did pull up their schedule. Um, First game of the season, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is Florida State. Now, I said when I
Yep.
was on with Eric that I think this could be a dark horse game for the last Corso appearance on game day. Since it's his alma mater, it's a big, at least two historical team matchup. He lives in Florida, and then also, where did the road, the traveling circus that is college game day start? It started in Tallahassee. Now, I know there's also good argument in the bigger game is, of course, the Ohio State Texas game, but that's got big noon kickoff. So I just want to throw that as an aside, at that game. But Alabama starts off at Florida State. Probably should win there. But then, they have Wisconsin, which may or may not be too much of a big deal, but then go on the road to Athens. They face Vandy, which I would love to throw up as a sure win, but last year, hey, but probably a sure win. But then they go to Mizzou, which will be tough, and then they end up with you. If they're not, you know, if they have more than one loss, if they even have one loss coming into Neyland, what is going to be the mindset not just of the fans, but of the team, because most of them committed to a team that had the success over the last 18 years that you're talking about. Are they going to be in a spot where, like, I don't know if we're in the right spot, or are we going in the right direction? And just a little bit of questioning if you go on the road to a place like Neyland, and if your quarterback situation is secure at that point, I think that is a good opportunity for Tennessee, or not to Neyland. Sorry, I keep going between the two. I saw versus Tennessee. I was like, oh yeah, Tennessee. That's a good time where Tennessee could catch you guys, and or could catch Bama. You can tell it's getting late when we're
Yeah,
recording this,
that's right.
but it's a good time for Tennessee to catch Alabama potentially. And since it is at home, if Tennessee starts off doing well, does that home crowd stop being an advantage? And I would say I've been in most of these stadiums in the SEC, anyways, including with Nick Saban at Alabama, and I will say that's probably not in the top 3 or 4, super crowd environments, but it's still a really good crowd environment. But if Tennessee is able to get up early, does that crowd kind of die out and take some away? So it'll be interesting to see. I do think that one's probably a toss up, as you alluded to. And then, I'm looking at Alabama's schedule. And then you go to Lexington. Tell me
This
what your thoughts are.
this is the spot here where I say Tennessee is a guaranteed win over Kentucky on the road, which is why I said that Mississippi State would be the letdown spot, because Tennessee, I'm just going to be honest, Tennessee owns Kentucky in football. You had a couple of games during the Pruitt years where Kentucky beat Tennessee, but there was even years where the year that Kentucky and Mark Stoops went 10-2, one of their losses was to a bad Tennessee team led by Jarrett Garantano. And, you know, nothing against Garantano, because I've come to find out since his time at Tennessee, he dealt with a ton of injuries. and then also having to play under Jeremy Pruitt, who was not the greatest coach, not the easiest coach to play for. It was a no-win situation for Garantano. But I actually found out earlier this week that there was people on the staff that said they've never seen a quarterback that had as many injuries as Garantano did. So it was just a bad situation for him from the start. But Tennessee owes Kentucky in football, and Tennessee will not lose that game in Lexington. I'm making that a guarantee right now on May the 16th, and the football season is still right at today's 100 days until the official kickoff of
Woo.
college football. So I mean, we're sitting here 100 days away. I'm making this guarantee right now that Tennessee will not lose to Kentucky. So that's why I say Mississippi State would be the letdown spot and not this game.
Perfect. Now, one thing I look at sometimes is I want to see what kind of schedule teams have coming into a game. And yeah, because sometimes, wear and tear, whatnot. And I'm going to make a comment, before we get to Florida from your side. I know we've talked about a lot, but there's something I do want to add on. But this Oklahoma game, I mean, I looked at, I'm like, okay, you've got Arkansas, Alabama at, two road games in a row, and then you come home to Oklahoma. And I'm like, oh, I could see that one being a toss up just because you may be beat up. And then I look at Oklahoma. They've got the Red River rivalry. Then they go to uh, Williams-Brice in South Carolina. Then they play Ole Miss. Then they've got you guys. So really not much of an advantage there, where usually you would think the slate that you had going into it. And now you're at home against Oklahoma. Do you think in year two in the SEC, Oklahoma has a better year under another coach who's really on the hot seat at a historic program?
It's funny you bring up the coach there, because it's all going to depend on the coach at Oklahoma. If he can get out of his own way and allow his offensive coordinator to do his job and let Brent Venables focus on the defense, which he knows and can run, and had a very good defense at Oklahoma last year. He's had good defenses everywhere he's been, going back to Clemson and all that. If he can focus on the defense and let his offensive coordinator do his job and not try to micromanage him, Oklahoma will be successful this year and could come into a place like Neyland Stadium and steal a win. But if Brent Venables is the Brent Venables that he has been since coming to Oklahoma as a head coach, trying to micromanage the offense and run his defense, you'll be looking at another 6-6 type season. So
Yeah.
it could go one of two ways for Oklahoma this year.
And you know what that sounds like? You sound like someone explaining the Florida Will Muschamp experience. Florida first year Will Muschamp, middling results, then shooting up, having really good wins. Next year after that, we had a losing season. I'm not sure Oklahoma was there last year. I forget how they finished. But then you go into that fourth year and you're still saying maybe this is the year that the offensive coordinator doesn't get micromanaged. We'll see if it works out for them. Didn't work out for UF, but just the way you described it, I'm like, that's how I felt, back 2011 through 2014 watching Will Muschamp. But
And you want to know another coach that I would say is in the same boat? That's Mark Stoops at Kentucky.
yeah.
That's why I believe that Kentucky over the last couple of years has taken a step back. Now, there's also teams in the SEC that I feel like are a little bit better in the NIL type situation that Kentucky is, that also plays a factor. But you also look at the success Mark Stoops has had at Kentucky. If he would focus on his defense as well and bring in an offensive coordinator and let him do his job and not try to micromanage everything, once again, Kentucky, I feel like, would be a better program than they are right now. You've got a lot of coaches that are that way, and I give complete credit. And I know, I'm bringing up my team here. I give complete credit to Josh Heupel for he's an offensive guy, and he's got an offensive coordinator that they basically co-coordinate there. You've got the eyes in the box, and then you've got what Heupel sees on the field. And then he lets his defensive coordinators do their job. Tim Banks does a fantastic job. There is a great set of assistant coaches around Tim Banks as well that Josh Heupel said, you know what? I don't have to worry about what y'all are doing. I can focus on my side of the ball. Will I give my input on stuff? Yeah, absolutely. But that's your job. Defense is your job. I do the offense. When you've got coaches like that right there, they're going to be successful in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Yep. And you know who that kind of reminds me of a little bit? A Tennessee native by the name of Stephen Orr Spurrier. He ended up being a pretty good one.
All right, I think we're done here today. So.
No, we still got to go through the little bit of your schedule. I will say this: I didn't bring it up earlier, but after Oklahoma, you've got a bye week, and then you've got New Mexico State. So essentially, a second bye week, 2 bye weeks to prepare for Florida. So I know you have it, but at least you have that advantage coming in to Gainesville is 3 weeks to prepare.
And you know what? After looking at the schedule here, because this is the first time that I've done a deep dive into the schedule the way that we're doing now, I do think that's advantage Tennessee, especially because Florida in that same stretch there, they don't have the easiest schedule. Sorry, I'm pulling up y'all's schedule
Yeah,
real
I
quick.
can tell you. We have a bye week, then we play Georgia and Jacksonville, then we go on the road to Lexington, and then we go on the road to Oxford. Now, I don't think that's quite as scary of a game as if it were last year, because I think we
Right.
mentioned either before or I mentioned it when I was talking about Florida. Ole Miss has lost a lot of their too deep on both sides of the ball after last year. But Lane Kiffin's a great coach and does well with that transfer portal where he's going to have a dangerous team. But it's not quite as dangerous as, Jackson Dart, and, multi-year starter and a lot of the guys that they had that are now departed. So, but then again, it's towards the end of the year. So the hiccups they may have early in the year may be ironed out. But after
But
that,
but you also mentioned it. Tennessee, they play Oklahoma before having a bye week.
uh-huh.
Florida plays Georgia before going on the road to Kentucky.
Yep.
Then the following week, Tennessee plays against New Mexico State. Florida goes on the road to Ole Miss. So you're looking at Florida playing 3 SEC opponents, 2 of those on the road, while Tennessee gets an SEC opponent, a bye week, and then a group of 5 team after that. So that is, in my opinion, advantage Tennessee. But also, at the same time, with Tennessee getting a little bit healthy there, but also you're not going to be playing your starters a lot in that New Mexico State game. Do they take a step back after not having basically any meaningful reps in 2 weeks before going on the road to an opponent that you hadn't won on the road in 22 years? I mean, that's another thing that concerns me. But as far as the rest factor and things go, I do think it is advantage Tennessee there. But I still say all other factors are
Oh,
advantage Florida in that situation.
definitely. And you know what we talked about a little bit earlier, just the superstition, and you talking about the superstition of Tennessee not winning in Florida since 2003. It's been 22 years. There are people graduating from Tennessee this year and next year that were not alive for Tennessee win in Gainesville. And this is one of those games, and many times Tennessee probably should have won. And this is one of those times where, something like that sets up for it to be a perfect Tennessee win in Gainesville. And then something funky happens, a 4th and 14, or, we hit a 65-yard.
That is the
You
worst
know,
memory of Tennessee playing at Florida that I can think of it was Felipe Franks, was it not, in 2017 that hits the Hail Mary to
yeah,
win the ball game when Tennessee had the game won. They had it won. And then here comes the Hail Mary. I don't remember who the wide receiver was, but got behind the defense and it took a perfect throw from Felipe Franks in the end zone. as the clock runs out. I still have nightmares about that game.
Hail Mary full of grace for the Gators was the call by Brad Nessler. I'm pretty sure it was Nessler who said it. But I can tell you, the night before I took the bar exam in Florida, I had done all my studying and I just decided to flip through, see what's on TV. That game is on TV. And I remember tweeting after watching the final 5 minutes because the game was tied and all the momentum's for Tennessee. Jim McElwain's not taking timeouts. And I remember tweeting, and it's probably still on one of my profiles, and that's, man, had that play not happened, Tennessee wins the game, and McElwain might have been fired right there, and it wouldn't have taken a few more weeks and death threats because it was such a mismanaged game. And I don't say that to rub, your nose in that. I'm just going with the Tennessee. You're
100% right. It
Yeah.
seems like every time that it feels like Tennessee's got a chance to win in Gainesville, something like that happens. You had Heupel's first season in Florida. Tennessee had momentum coming out of the half. Now Florida was ahead. I believe the score was 14-10, if I'm remembering correctly, or 13-10, something like that. Tennessee goes for it on fourth down. Has a wide open receiver that if he catches the ball, goes down and scores a touchdown. Wide receiver drops the pass. Florida goes down and scores. All of a sudden, Florida has all the momentum, and then Tennessee can't really do much the rest of the game. What does the rest of Tennessee's season look like if that pass is completed and Tennessee scores? What does the rest of Florida's season look like if that happens? Now, if I'm not mistaken, that was Dan Mullen's last year where he just completely double birds whatever happens the rest of the season. But Tennessee, that was a game that instead of going 7-6 after the loss in the bowl game, maybe you're looking at regular season 8-4. You win an Ole Miss game later in the season, you're looking at Josh Heupel's first season going 9-3 after just the complete debacle of what Jeremy Pruitt did at Tennessee. So it just seems like, as you mentioned, every single year Tennessee comes to the swamp. Something happens that is just out of the ordinary. And that's what I'm afraid of this year because of my battered Vol syndrome. I just feel like everything is going in that direction once again that I cannot and will not convince myself at this moment that Tennessee can go into Gainesville and win until it finally happens.
Yeah, and it'll be very interesting. And one more thing, and really, I am confident for Florida this year. I don't want it to seem like I'm not, but I'm also not trying to play a super homer. But I can on my podcast, as you know. But it'll also be interesting to see what's the state of Florida at that time. Granted, it could be one of those things where Florida's even like, all right, we've got like 5 losses, we're done. Like you said, there's such a high variance, depending on what happens against the Texas teams or in Death Valley or on the road at Miami, which is a game we should win, especially after all the turnover at Miami after last season, much less going from Cam Ward to Carson Beck, and Beck's not throwing right now. Which not being able to throw with a new team I talked about with Florida, the chemistry that misses with it. Well, much less if you got a completely new team, new offense that Beck has. So it's going to be interesting because I could see a scenario where you come in and Florida, and I think this is an extreme situation. I don't think it's likely, but Florida could be limping to the finish line, or Florida could have 1-2 losses where they've got to win out and it's a big game. And it'll be interesting to see where that is since it is towards the end of the season, but also from the Florida perspective where you guys end up with Vandy more than likely a win after that. We've still got a rivalry game the next week at home against Florida State. That could end up being a good Florida State team, or it could be another 2-10, and it's like, okay, Vandy's the harder matchup. And there's another text from Jesse. You can't say that. But anyways.
Yeah, but you alluded to the Vanderbilt game into the season. I do think that's going to be a win as well because, and I'm just going to be totally honest here. You've got Tennessee on one level, and Vanderbilt is still on a level below Tennessee. even with Diego Pavia coming back for his fifth, sixth year, whatever it is now. Tennessee is just a better team than Vanderbilt, and that's all there is to it. And Tennessee gets the game in Knoxville as well. So I believe that Tennessee comes out with a win in that game. So, my predictions still could change whenever we get closer to the season, whenever Skylar and I make our predictions, but I'm still gonna sit on the hill of Tennessee goes 9-3 this season. Anything more than that, Tennessee fans ought to be grateful for that. Anything less, and I think you start asking some questions, but by no means is Heupel on the hot seat. If you go 6-6 with what you have on the roster and what you have as far as a schedule this season, yeah, there's going to be a lot of questions. But if you go 8-4, there's not going to be a lot of questions asked. There's going to be some murmurings, as there always is. But I'm looking at 9-3 is probably what Tennessee is going to go this year. I think you just miss out on the playoffs this season. But we'll see what happens whenever we get there. Still got a long way to go as far as summer practices, fall camps, and all that stuff before we go into any real predictions.
Now, just one of the fun questions while we're here, while we're talking Florida, Tennessee. Here I am saying Florida fans really need to see 9 wins. I talked about last year, 7 wins, and that's going to be fine for another year, but it's got to be better after that. And we hit 7 wins, and I was like, okay, good. Here we are. And you're talking about Tennessee. Should get 9-3, probably miss the playoffs. Which team do you think? And of course, we don't know, but just looking at the schedules and who all's on the schedules, if you had to choose a 9-3 based on the schedules, if Tennessee and Florida end up both 9-3, who would you give if it were the 12th spot of the playoffs? Who would you give that to? You can be a homer, you can choose Florida, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So I'm gonna take it two different directions.
Okay.
So I'm gonna say that both teams are 9-3. Obviously, they played each other. The easiest thing would be to say, all right, whoever won the head to head, that's who gets in. I've been saying I think that Florida wins that game. So in that case, I think that Florida gets in. But I also got to look at who is that third loss to. Tennessee has got a couple of common opponents with Florida. Both teams are playing Georgia this year. Both teams are playing Kentucky. Both teams playing Vanderbilt.
We
Tennessee
don't play
plays.
Vandy.
Oh, y'all don't play. That's right. That's right.
It'd be
Y'all don't
nice
play
if we
Vandy.
did.
Yeah,
Mississippi
both of us play Mississippi State. Yes, that's where we're at. You guys play Texas. We play Alabama. You've also got LSU and Ole Miss, two tougher games. So if you're looking at the schedule and Tennessee loses to, let's just say Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, like I said, Florida loses to Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M. I think that Florida, first off, they get the win over Tennessee, and their losses are better losses. And then we can go down a rabbit hole of what exactly is a better loss. But I do think that those teams right there are better than Tennessee playing Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Now, if you look down through there and, Florida still beats Tennessee, but you guys lose to, I'll just throw it off the wall, you guys lose to South Florida. That's going to come back to look bad on you guys once the playoffs happen. Vice versa. Let's just say Tennessee beats Florida, and Florida's 3 losses are Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee, but Tennessee loses to Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi State. I think that you might give the advantage to Florida there because of the losses being better. It's obviously,
Now,
I think head-to-head should be the number one thing. So whoever wins that game, I think they should get the nod, especially with the game being as late in the season as it is. But then you also look at who has the better losses. Florida has the tougher schedule. So I think that Florida, because of that, their losses are obviously going to be better. I think you give the advantage to Florida.
okay. And, you brought up, and this is another fun one, just while we're here talking, and maybe this will be something that listeners will look at. You brought up, what if Florida lost to USF? And my counter is, well, then that means we would have beaten one of the Texas, Georgias. We would have had
That's
a
fair. Yes.
greater magnitude way. But how does the playoff committee weigh a bad loss versus now you've potentially beaten a top 10, top five team on that? So it'll be an interesting season as we see more of this play out. But yeah, obviously, I think we'll talk again. If not before, definitely in November. But I'm sure you and I will have something throughout the season where we come on, we roundtable some issues. Who knows? Maybe we'll get someone on to come defend Kentucky's honor at some point, as we both have seemingly taken shots. As I think combined, we have 6 or 7 losses in the last, oh gosh, 1984 was 40 years ago. So we're talking like we both own Kentucky. Someone's going to come in and say, at least we have basketball. And I'm going to say, we have more Final Fours and national titles since 2000 than you. So stop telling me how good your program is. But, anyways,
Yeah.
and here comes all the Kentucky basketball fans now.
Yeah, exactly. What for you watch the channel. So but no, I do want to throw myself a little bit of a bone. You guys before last season, y'all lost, what was it, 3 straight to Florida or to Kentucky, maybe even 4 straight, something
Yeah.
like that. I came into the season last year and I said there is no way in the world, and I'm pretty sure that game was at home too. I said there's no way in the world Florida loses another one. And I think that if they do lose to Kentucky this season, I think that is the straw that finally breaks and Billy Napier gets fired. So I want to throw myself a bone and say I picked Florida to win that game, and sure enough, they did. Because there was a lot of people that were doubting that Florida was going to be able to beat Kentucky last
Yeah.
year whenever that game happened.
It took Mark Stoops' first losing team in years to pull it off. But dang it, we ran the score up on them, and there's a video. You can search it on the page at Gator Podcast, where Cash Daniels, and I always hate when I see these highlights from when we lose at home, and of course one that was on SEC Nation and possibly Game Day for years. Cash Daniels taking like the 2 things of water and doing the stone cold, slapping together and pouring on them. But if you go on at Gator Podcast, you can find the video where I took an orange and a blue Gatorade and did that right there, field in the background, pouring it down on me. And yeah, it was so great. Had such a fun night. I ended up missing my little shuttle back to the RV lot, which is on the far side of campus from the football stadium. It's in the baseball stadium parking lot. So if anyone's been to UF, that's about at least 3/4 of a mile away.
Ooh,
And so
that's a
I'm
nice
covered.
walk.
Yeah, I'm covered in Gatorade. I'm sticky at this point, and now I've got to walk across campus because I went to make sure it was the right shuttle because it wasn't marked, and my whole family was on there and it left without me. So then I'm like hightailing it across campus. So I figured that's another fun story. But you know what? I didn't care. Why did I not care? Because we finally beat Kentucky. And in no world should there be a time where I'm that ecstatic to beat the Kentucky Wildcats in football. But here we are. But dang, and I'm sure you would feel the same thing if somehow Tennessee went on a losing streak to Kentucky as well. Like we should not be here. But dang it, I'm happy it's over.
Yeah, that's right. But we said coming into this we were going to look at some other SEC teams, but you know what? With the passion we both have for our teams, we've almost gone an hour and 20 minutes on it. So we'll probably cut it here tonight. Um, but hopefully the next time we get together, we'll have some other guys on to be able to talk some more SEC in general. Maybe do some look at the head coaches on the hot seat. There's all sorts of topics we can do. But Daniel, before we get off here, you want to tell everybody where they can find you?
Yes. Currently, I'm going through a little bit of a rebrand. I'm trying to take the name down from a long name, Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast, just to Gator Truth. So you'll be able to find that at YouTube, and then also on X or Twitter, whatever you still want to call it. It is at Gator Podcast. I have it there in my header. Feel free to give us a follow, listen. Even if you're a rival fan, I do try and be fair and balanced. I can also be a homer at times. I know I love ticking off Georgia fans every year by picking Florida over Georgia, no matter how bad we are, and watching Trey from our Georgia affiliate at the College Huddle, watching him just kind of crack a smile and be like, I can't believe this guy's doing it. I'll acknowledge it's an upset, but definitely check it out. We like to have fun here. And of course, Michael, where can everyone find you?
You can find us on YouTube at Vol Fanatics Show. You can also find us on X, Facebook, Instagram. We do have a website. It's volfanatics.com. And then, of course, you can find Daniel and myself, as well as all of our other affiliates with the College Huddle. You can go to collegehuddle.com. You can also find the College Huddle on YouTube, and you can find the College Huddle on X as well. I believe the College Huddle, we're up to, was it 80 plus podcast strong? Am I correct on that one, Daniel?
I believe that's where we are. So definitely check it out, especially if you're a Kentucky fan and want to tell us that it's finally the year Kentucky football actually means something. Um, they could beat Vandy one year. Anyways,
Yeah,
sorry.
maybe they can. We'll see. But Daniel, really appreciate you coming on tonight, and looking forward to talking with you again in the future.
Definitely. Always a good time talking to you, Michael. And I guess before we get out here, I just want to say go